So, yes, I've got the fancy glasses on. I put my regular glasses down and I have no earthly idea where I put them. Typical blonde. Anyway, we're doing this Courtney's Baby Plan Allison Leigh Special Edition Harlequin. It actually says on the binder here it was an August 11th Harlequin Special Edition. Return to the Double C Ranch by Allison Leigh. It's a special edition, which is Life, Love, and Family. Her baby secret is out. 26-year-old nurse Courtney Clay longs to be a mother. Husband and father candidate in tiny Weaver, Wyoming? None. So she's carefully checking out profiles on a sperm bank registry. But when Courtney takes in Mason Hyde after his accident, the oh-so-familiar private patient sprawled in her cot has her remembering old dreams about a long ago passionate night spent with this gorgeous gone the next morning secret agent. If Mason thought for 1 minute he'd be a good father, he'd loan himself to this beautiful nurse forever. But Courtney's solo baby plan will go full speed ahead without him, unless this Lone Ranger figures out how he really feels, and fast. And, of course, the return to the Double C Ranch is under the big blue Wyoming sky. This family discovers true love, heart, and home. So, we've got paper clips. Let's hit them before you get a book reading. Okay, we're going to start out with the little synopsis. There was no future for Courtney with him, and she was the kind of woman who deserved a future. She was young and beautiful, caring, and came from a strong, close family. He was part young, scarred up on the inside as well as the out, and the only family he knew or who mattered to him was the family of the Hollands Windward Security Agency. It was a fact of life that was easy enough to remember when he usually a content or two away from her. But sprawled across a bed under her roof? That was entirely a different matter. She reappeared in the doorway with a gigantic St. Bernard at her side. "You didn't get a dog," Mason eyed the shaggy beast. "You got a damn horse." She grinned, bringing a surprising impish to her oval face and tucked along her golden hair behind her ear. He just couldn't take his eyes off her. Okay, we're going to start at page 31. Plato? She realized she was speaking so fast she was almost babbling and hated giving him any evidence that she was unsettled by his presence. "My St. Bernard, he's out in the backyard right now." "You didn't have a dog before." "I didn't own a house before, with a yard before," she returned. "No," his gaze felt heavy on her face, "you had that apartment." So he's letting her know that even, she's being his nurse right now, that he recalls moments they shared between them, which is kind of romantic in its own way. Page 43. If she had learned anything in life, it was not to wait too long, to put into action the things you wanted. Well, the waiting was done. For months she'd been checking out various websites of sperm banks, checking references, checking reputations, and then finally she settled on one. Big Sky Cryo Bank, and it was located in Montana. Had been around for as long as she'd been alive. Came up with impeccable references. Now, given what she was earning, thanks to Mason, she would be able to bank enough extra money, pay the cryobank fees and the associated physician fees, since she knew her health insurance wasn't going to cover the process of getting pregnant. She also had enough in her savings to tide her over for a few months when the baby came, so she wouldn't have to go back to work that very second her maternity leave was used up. "Everything is perfect," she said to Plato. Or was it? Okay, moving on to page 50 and 51. So you're trying to find yourself a husband on the damn internet. Don't you know the dangers are in there? Don't you know that I'm a grown woman and, page 51, more capable of handling any supposed dangers out there? How's it any worse than meeting a stranger in a bar or a Valentine's Day kissing booth?" she added with a pointed amusement. "And just to be clear, I am not looking for a husband." "Just to be clear," he returned, "I know that you're a grown woman. My memory's not impaired about that at all." Page 58 and 59. I'm guessing you had a dependency problem. His expression went more blank. You don't have to tell me all the details or any of them unless you choose to, but it would be helpful where your care is concerned if it's something recent or not. His scar where it traveled from his temple looked white, whiter even than the line around his thinly compressed lips. Not. The word was snapped off. It was more of an answer than she expected to get. The woman inside had a million questions that she had to squelch. The nurse, though, had a few. Would it be better for you if I really did flush 'em? No, because then I could get more if I wanted, because she knew that was true enough. Are you going to want to? His lashes lifted. The green of his eyes was pale, sharp. That remains to be seen, doesn't it? His honesty felt brutal. During her nursing training in Cheyenne, she volunteered at a detoxification and rehabilitation unit. She worked with the patients of all ages, both sexes, who came from money and those who were living on the streets. Some were there by choice and some weren't. She heard every story, every excuse, every reason and how they were there in the first place, and every reason and every goal they had and why they wouldn't be back. Some made it through, some didn't. Those who were the most successful were the ones who were honest with themselves at least, though every step they took. Well, her voice sounded husky, even to her own ears. Try to remember that it isn't a crime to ask for help when you need it. And that's what I'm here for, to help you until you're back on your feet. The only help I need at the moment is for you to sit up so I can see. He's flirting with her. And then she bolts right up, and she hadn't had her navel pierced when they had been together. Getting their navels pierced was the one last thing she and Margaret had done together. Sorry, even as she said the words, she felt her heart fill her cheeks. I'm not. The most entertaining thing that's happened to me since I've been face planted on your floor. Which you wouldn't have done, she reminded him, if you asked for assistance. She turned on her bare heel and hurried back to her bedroom, stopping only long enough to put the dog out in the backyard with the fresh food and water. By that time she'd thrown her hair up in a clip, pulled on a long-sleeved t-shirt, a pair of cargo pants, and shoved her feet into sandals. Axel and her brother Ryan had arrived. I stopped and picked up reinforcements, Axel said, and she stopped in surprise at the sight of her brother. Page 77. But her mom was already smiling with warmth into Mason's face. She took his hands in both of hers. Mr. Hyde, she greeted. The pale brown eyes that she passed on to Courtney were warm and sparkling. It's been over a year since you've been to town. It's good to see you again. I'd ask you how you're doing, but it seems a bit unnecessary under the circumstances. Feeling strangely on edge, Courtney shifted. She almost forgotten that Mason had met her parents, too, when they were in Weaver. Mason accidentally cracked his cast, and we're here to get it fixed. Her mother gave her a mild look. It happened. She turned back to Mason. If you're feeling up to it, you must come have dinner with us. I know Sawyer would enjoy seeing you again. My social calendar is pretty tight these days, but I'll do what I can. Rebecca laughed, and her still dark hair bounced around her shoulders. You're frustrated with the inactivity. She patted his hand. I have some experience with men like you. She glanced at Courtney. Bring him by the house before you go on shift tonight. We'll all have dinner, and we'll get him back to your place when he gets tired of us old fogies. Dr. Clay, Mason drawled. If you're considered an old fogey, then getting old suddenly has a lot more appeal. Rebecca laughed again, then shook her head when her name was Paige. Duty calls. See you both later. She hurried off in a direction she'd come from. Courtney let out a careful breath. She wasn't necessarily surprised at her mother's hospitality toward Mason, but she still felt a little awkward about it. Page 85. Hair color any, eye color any. He frowned at the next search option. Blood type? Oh, wait. Courtney rushed over and came right behind him. I forgot something. Just let me. He glanced back at her. She was holding a butter knife in one hand and a piece of bread in the other. Specimen type? What the hell kind of matchmaking site is this? His lips pressed together for a moment. It's not that kind of website, finally she said. And then she sighed noisily, her hands gesturing with the knife and the slice of bread. You can see for yourself what kind of site it is. He looked back at the glowing computer screen. Yeah, I can see. Some place called Big Sky Cryobank. Question is, why are you looking at a sperm donor? Despite the reason for the color in her cheeks, her chin lifted slightly. For heaven's sake, Mason, what do you think? He didn't like the suspicion curling through him. It was kind of suspicion that made a person feel nervous, sick. Someone wants a baby. Not someone, me. She moistened her lips. Her gaze was steady, most defiant. I want to have a baby. Confirmation didn't make his gut settle down any. Why? She huffed. Why not? His brain felt like it had been scrambled. You're young. You got plenty of time to find a husband. He had forced the words out of his mouth even now, even though he'd spent the past year and a half reminding himself of that very fact. And then have a family. She started to fold her arms over her chest, then remembered the bread knife which she was holding, and stopped. You sound very old-fashioned, and I don't want a husband, she said. I want a baby. He hadn't thought that he was particularly old-fashioned, but maybe it was when it came to some things, or some people. Borrow someone else's baby for an afternoon, he suggested rapidly. God knows that family of yours seems to keep 'em popping out regularly. She looked at heavenward and then shook her head. I'm not going to debate this with you. She went back to the kitchen. Do you want mustard on your ham sandwich? She called out after a moment later. He didn't give a flip about mustard or the lack of it. He looked back at the computer screen and scrolled up to the top of the web page, then to the bottom. Her criteria for the donor was broad. She didn't seem to care about ethnic origins or ancestry or religious background. She didn't care about physical characteristics. The only thing she had selected that the donor had some college. Some, not even a degree. The father could be any mug off the street who needed to make a few bucks by donating his genetic cocktail to a sperm bank. He grimaced. There was nothing about the situation he liked. Nothing. Page 153. Number 37892, she repeated brightly. That's the donor I have chosen. I can't believe you're still going through with this. If you thought that I wouldn't, why'd you buy that keepsake rattle? Let me rephrase this. I can't believe you still want to have a baby via spermicicle. Looks like we're going to keep on going for a while. My eyes are itching. Pardon me. She propped her hands on her hips. We're back to that now. Why shouldn't I? She waved her hands. I'm reasonably responsible. I can afford to raise a child if I'm careful and if I have a fabulous family around me to support me. I'd rather do this on my own than depend on a man who to be with me and who doesn't even want to be there in the first place. His eyes narrowed. Are you speaking generally or specifically? She huffed. Neither, for heaven's sake. Mason, stop worrying. I decided I want a baby long before you came back into the picture. Don't want to bash your ego, but you really had nothing whatsoever to do with it. I just realized that those things you really, really want in life, you shouldn't wait, because you never know what might happen. This is page 154. She gestured at him. You're a perfect example, she said. You could have been killed when you were hit by that SUV. There wasn't anything in your life that you would have regretted not doing, if you hadn't been as lucky as you were. She made a face. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. You're the emotional island guy. You don't let yourself care about anything else or anyone else besides your job. My job is the only thing that I'm good at. His voice was flat and the scar on his face standing out lightly. I didn't fail at it, and it failed me. Who'd you fail, Mason? Your ex-wife? The one who didn't like your scars? The one who didn't want to hang around to see you conquer your painkiller addiction? Don't waste your time analyzing me. And don't waste your time thinking that I should wait around for some guy to sweep me off my feet and make my every dream come true, she said swiftly. I live in Weaver, Mason. I know nearly every guy in this town. If there was someone around who made my bells ring, then I'd be out there ringing them, but there's not. Weaver's not the only place in the world. You think I don't know that? I lived in Cheyenne while I was studying nursing. I traveled with my parents around the United States. I traveled abroad with friends. I chose Weaver. It's where I grew up, and it's where I want my child to grow up. Everywhere I turn, I'm surrounded by family and friends who've found their partners in life, who've got their metaphorically white picket fence with babies and all. She lowered her hands finally. Well, I'm not waiting for a white picket fence that may never come. Maybe you and I aren't so different after all. You know who and what you are, and I know who and what I am. They're just completely different planes. That was page 155. Okay, page 179. He can't have been in the snow for long, Mason said. I don't think he would have survived. Courtney couldn't disagree with that. She reached past Mason to run her fingers over the gently sleeping kitten's fur. Do you have any pets? I had a cat once. His expression closed and he nudged Plato off the chair. Never seen a dog that big sit on a chair like that. He knew lots of tricks already when I adopted him. A good friend of mine raised him from a pup. When she died, I took him in. He gave a quick look to her. What happened? To Margaret, you mean? She crossed her arms and leaned across the counter. Patriotic cancer. She looked at him. She was one of my instructors from the nursing school in Cheyenne. She was a foster mother, too, for the human variety, not just the canine. What happened to your cat you had? His brows yanked together. My ex-wife took her. The ex-wife. Again. Courtney studied the thumbnail. How long were you married? What is this, 20 questions again? Just being inquisitive, she smiled coolly. Do you still love her? Is that why you don't want to talk about it? He sighed noisily. Do you like talking about your failures? He had a point. Sorry, she nodded toward the kitten. So do you want Evan to look after the kitten over, or do you want Evan to look the kitten over? It's late. My words are getting stumbling. He grimaced. Yeah, no, I'm not in love with Greta. There should have been no earthly reason for her to be relieved hearing this, but there was. Mostly because she knew Mason wasn't lying. If he didn't want to tell someone the truth, he simply didn't say anything at all. That was something that she did know about him. Well, Sunday dinner is at my Uncle Dan's today, and you can bring the kitten. I'm sure Leandra and Evan will be there as usual. Dinner, he nearly barked. I thought you meant taking the cat to the office or something. You can take the cat. You're the one who rescued it. She tilted her head slightly. What is so horrifying to you about attending a simple dinner? You've been over to my folks. What's so different about this? It's Sunday dinner. The stuff that's for family. That stuff is for whoever is welcome, she corrected him mildly. And when I saw my aunt and uncle at church this morning, they specifically mentioned they hoped you'd come. His eyes narrowed slightly. You mean they hope that you would go, and since you've been giving the whole Sunday deal a miss since I got here. She shrugged. Don't take it personally. Sunday afternoons are also the chance I have to play catch-up around here. Laundry, house cleaning just doesn't happen on their own. Everyone in this family is used to hits and misses. He didn't look entirely convinced. Fine, just so the cat can get looked over. She hid a smile. Well, we'll need to leave in an hour or so. He nodded grumpily, picked up the nearly empty mug he'd been finger-dipping into from with one long arm, reached over to set it in the sink. Then he grabbed the crutches, pulled it to his feet, and headed to his room. But before he made it, he turned back to scoop the kitten up around the towel and neatly inside his shirt pocket. Body warmth, he muttered. Then he crutched out of the kitchen. Courtney looked down at Plato, and the dog's eyes were staring after Mason, his dark brown eyes soft. She rubbed his head between his ears. I know, she murmured. I love him, too. Then she went through the arch to the dining room, stopping next to the computer desk. She slowly sat down, moved the mouse. The screensaver cleared. Number 37892 came into view. She stared at the computer screen for a moment, and then, with a flick of the finger, she turned the computer off. That was page 181. We're moving to page 194 and 195. Cops get married, Axel returned. Anyone who's a first responder gets married. They have lives. And a damn high divorce rate, he muttered, and statistically speaking, he knew the success of marriages for the HW operatives was even rarer. Anyone who gets married takes a chance. Axel glanced out at the doorway. Just because Greta couldn't take it doesn't mean Courtney can't. Mason stiffened. Who the hell said anything about that? Axel just shook his head. Dude, you have it bad. She's too young anyway. I've got 13 years on her, for God's sake. At that, Axel laughed. 26 years on this earth and 106 years in her soul. Tara said something like that once about her. Called her an old soul. Said it was one of the things that make her such a good nurse, that ability she's got to let people just be who they are. If you haven't noticed that about her by now, he shook his head, then maybe I do need my vision checked, because as far as I'm concerned, age differences one way or the other only becomes an issue if you make them one. She's your cousin. I think you'd want to protect her a little bit more. From the likes of you? Axel rolled his eyes, walked towards the door. That is one of the most asinine things I've ever heard come out of your mouth. He lifted his hand. Think about Tristan's offer. Profiling instead of direct security. Would you get out of the way of flying objects more often? It's not quite a banker's 9 to 5 in our business, but it's as close as you'll ever get. Mason didn't reply. He watched Axel stride to the truck where his uncle was waiting and drive away. He slowly pushed the door closed. Plato and his new sidekick had padded into the living room. Even as Mason watched the dog pick the kitten up in his mouth and set her on the couch, then jumped up beside her, circled a few times, and settled down with a heart-wrenching sigh. Talk about the odd couple. Plato just wagged his tail a few times. If the dog understood or agreed, it was pretty obvious that he didn't care. As you see, we're out of paper clips. Why? I want you to read this book. I'm not going to give away the ending. It is a great ending. It is a great book. And not very many pages, so if you don't want to sit there with a heavy book and read, it's probably the book for you to read. I'm going to give it an 8.5. So that's a pretty good rating and a pretty good book. Check it out. Until next time, stay safe. Be washing those hands. Be taking all those extra precautions. And be well. God bless.